I have tested a lot of the ideas in the book. I think what's unique about the book is it comes out of my own experience as a church planter, working with church planters around the world. I head up a global church planting initiative at Asbury. We've trained over 1,000 leaders in 20 different countries in the last 5 years since I've been there. And so I've got, I kind of try to keep two perspectives as a kind of a practical theologian always. Is one, anchored in experience of what's actually happening, in reality, but kind of double listening. One is, what has God done in the past through historic movements, and what is God doing today through global movements and multiplication movements that are happening right now. And a lot of the principles and the marks in the book, I think, are applicable historically, but also as we kind of look out at the landscape of current movements, how God is moving, where the church is multiplying. And so, yeah, I mean, a year or so after the book, I guess, did it come out last year? I can't. Had two books come out with Zondervan at the exact same time, which was kind of crazy. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I still stand behind the book. I think it rings true. I've pressed even more into, I think, even post-pandemic. Well, we're not post-pandemic, we're still in it. I think a lot of this stuff really, kind of the micro discipleship is how God has, how the church has grown, in the book of Acts and in every significant movement. And then also globally, you have the church, gathered, but also scattered. And I think those are elements that really need to be recovered for today.
That's good. Well, I've got, man, that is good. Beyond that, I've got some questions here. I know Steve's got a couple questions too. Are you okay if we just kind of bounce them back?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. I don't have any scripts, so you guys
fire
off.
That's fine. I just want to, and if you want to say that's a stupid question, you could say.
No. There are no stupid questions.
So yeah, on page 21, you said that it was never the intention of the Wesley brothers to separate from the Church of England, that they viewed Methodism as a renewal movement within the church. Yes. And then you conclude on page 174, you actually talk about a movement, this renewal for discipleship zeal within the Church of England that that Wesley ended up leaving. So those two events are a couple hundred years apart. It sounds like. So do you think that speaks to the pace of change in institutionalized groups? I mean, Wesley tries to renew the Church of England, ends up separating from it, and then it's not for, you mentioned something that's happening now. So what do we learn from that?
I think one, there's a lot of thoughts here. One, Wesley actually never did personally separate. He remained in the denomination to the day he died. He was buried a Church of England Anglican priest. The American piece, he allowed them to separate because after the Revolutionary War, all the ministers had to go back. The church in America had been affiliated, and so you had all of thousands of Methodists that all of a sudden didn't have access to the sacraments. And so I think that's interesting. So one thought is, God never gives up on us. It's never too late. I think too, so can churches be renewed? Is it, yes, absolutely. Two, I think you see the significance of leadership, and so Wesley, the way I do a lot of work with the Church of England currently. So the movement I mentioned in the back, I'm actually a part of that and serve on a team with them in London. And Wesley had no institutional support. So there was no vision for movement in the Church of England in the 1700s. They were highly suspicious of the evangelical revival. They were highly suspicious of Wesley. And it's amazing that he did what he did in spite of all of that. And I think what you have is what's going on in England right now that is fascinating is, one, it's in a downward spiral like other major denominations, we're post-Christendom context world. But what's fascinating is you've got this movement within the Church of England that is spirit-filled. A lot of the catalysts for this came out of the Alpha movement. The church where Alpha was born, it's called Holy Trinity Brompton. They've just proliferated into a global network. Alpha's used, it's really probably second to the Bible, the most widely used discipleship evangelism resource ever in the history of the church. I mean, it's really incredible. If you've never heard of Alpha or looked into it, it's a 10-week course that is designed to happen in the home and gather people in small groups. And it asks questions like, who is God? What is evil? Who's the Holy Spirit? Just simple questions that unbelievers ask. And millions of people have come to faith on the Alpha course. Like Bear Grylls is a big advocate of it. I believe he came to faith on the Alpha course. He's a big Alpha guy. And so anyway, a lot of renewal kind of started there and it's really a movement within the Church of England. It's this ancient denomination that is planting hundreds of churches. And what's fascinating, they're planting churches in these ancient old buildings in like city centers, and they'll send out a planter with a team and some money, and the statistical growth has really been very encouraging to kind of just see what the Lord's doing. But in answer to your question, you have institutional, it's kind of like they're just so desperate, and God's raised up a couple key voices for this. So a friend of mine, Rick Thorpe, who I mentioned in the book, he's a bishop and has a historic position. They've appointed him as essentially bishop over church planting. And Church of England's never had a position like this before. And it's really quite fascinating. So it's kind of like the importance of leadership. And so from a denominational perspective, can denominations that are in decline be renewed? Yes. And it's kind of a both and, because it's you need an organic grassroots movement, but you also have to have some gatekeepers, if you will, at the higher level that are opening the door for God, to move in fresh ways. Right. And so there are those in the Church of England, despite all the craziness and decline and different things, there are those that just have a vision for renewal and haven't given up on the denomination. They could have gone non-denom, but they haven't. And that excites me. I think it's encouraging to see how God's doing that in historic movements today.
Have you seen that play out in other, are you aware of other scenarios where that's happening?
Yeah, it's well, what's unique about Church of England is they're holding together as a, whereas in North America, we're a bunch of pioneer, we'll just start our new denomination. If I don't like what you're saying, man, I'm going to start a new church, and so, and that's given church planting a bad name, hasn't it? Like, a lot of church planting is just, church splits or, and so in North America, like right now, Methodism is getting ready to split. You've got the formation of a new conservative Methodist movement. You've got kind of a large liberal faction. And what's unique with Church of England is somehow they're holding things together. Will that always be the case? I just don't know. So in North America, for instance, the Episcopal Church is blown apart, and you've got this new Anglican movement in North America, the Anglican Church in North America, which a lot of the leaders came out of the Episcopal Church. And that's a church planting movement, which is really fun to look at because it's liturgical, it's sacramental, but it's also evangelical and missional. And they've planted close to, I want to say close to 1,000 churches in the last 10 years. And so that's a neat movement just to look at as, can you plant institutional churches that are denominational? And so in answer to your question, what are some examples? In North America, you have, it's been more difficult because it's not a state church to
Right.
hold these things in tension. So you have like Presbyterians of, there's the PCA, the PCUSA is kind of the more liberal, and then you have several other new entities. And I know in the Baptist world, you've got different Baptist groups. So I think Church of England is a unique case study of how can this ancient or this old tradition renew itself. And God always, there's a good book. I thought it was here. I think I took it to my office. Thomas Oden was a Methodist theologian, but just a real ecumenical theologian, wrote a book called, I think, Renewal of the Mainline. That's real fascinating, where he looks at some of this, how denominations are being renewed, can be renewed, and he's advocating for that. And I think you have to find kind of an orthodox center. I think there has to be like, some core, what are the core kind of places that we can say, this is where Jesus is, this is the, Trinitarian theology. And so in some of these broader denominations, like maybe it's the creeds, maybe it's kind of, some core kind of statements of faith that hold things together.